Hi everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, we are going to talk about over-functioning. Maybe you have an idea what this is. Maybe you've never heard of this. And if you've never heard of it, well, welcome to the club. I just learned about this one recently, and it really hit a lot of spots for me. And actually, I had a very intense reaction. Like, I started crying when I learned about this because it hit home so much for me. I had no idea what overfunctioning was. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about what it is. And of course, I'll share why it was so intense for me, why I had such an intense reaction to it, but also what does that mean? What can we do now that we know that information? So I want to share that with you just in case there are other people out there. And when I read about it, I really recognized that there are probably a lot of people in the same boat as me. And so I felt really passionate about it, that let's get that information out and let's share it, because sometimes when we have insights and we learn about things, it's really nice to share that with people. Other people might be going through the same thing and they might not know what that is also, right? So over-functioning, you're like an emotional savant. So basically it's not quite like an empath. I know that there's a lot of people out there who identify as empaths, and I never saw myself as an empath. Yeah, I thought, sure, maybe I had moments where I was very empathetic to others, but I didn't describe myself that way, and I never saw myself that way. So for me to learn what overfunctioning was, it's when you move quickly to soothe or stabilize or help others because you take responsibility for the harmony in a situation. And for myself, that really resonated because I recognize that that is often a role that I have played in many situations, likely, tied into the fact that I spent a lifetime being conflict avoidant. So I'm sure that there's a direct link there, but it's more or less, when you are soothing people who are upset, or you are a people pleaser, if somebody is upset, you rush to, sort everything out for them. And I spent a lifetime doing that. I 100% did that, and I recognize that. And I think I was uncomfortable with maybe some large feelings in a room, and because of my own discomfort, I would rush to soothe somebody who was upset and maybe didn't learn the art of holding space and allowing people to feel the feelings that they have, and maybe labeling certain emotions as bad, or especially when we look at discomfort, if you're looking at somebody's anger or jealousy or insecurity or some of these more typically negative emotions, and you see somebody struggling with that and quickly rushing to try and find a solution so that they don't feel that way, that's overfunctioning. And I also think that it's tied into, being an overachiever. I am 100% an overachiever in everything, all of the time in my life. And it's not necessarily to be competitive, to be, recognized as amazing at something, but more or less as a way to mitigate people's discomfort or disapproval. And I think that really kind of drove a lot of my behaviors. And so overfunctioning and overachieving and conflict avoidance blended together to make this perfect situation, which was my life. And I'm saying that facetiously. I'm very sarcastic. It it was awful. And so I'm actively trying to undo all of that, which is why I want to share all this with you, because if you have been living under the same pressure cooker that I have, then I feel for you, and I don't want you to struggle in the same way. So that's what overfunctioning is. And like I said, it's not where it's not in the sense of, an empath who feels what everybody else is feeling, and you sense it, and and maybe, there is some of that aspect. But like, I think the view when we look at empath is that, the opposite of an empath is an energy vampire. That's kind of the popular terms that are coined right now. And I think when I think of an empath, it really puts you kind of in a victim light. And I don't really like that. Whereas, and if you look at like Carl Jung's work, and I was reading about some of it recently, and how he talked about empaths, and to get through this they could work towards emotional sovereignty and that sort of thing. And I'm a big fan of emotional sovereignty. I think that's an amazing term or concept, being completely sovereign in your emotions, and how you respond to other people. So how you take control, and you have a strong sense of boundaries and that sort of thing. Whereas, an empath is like a sponge, an energy sponge, where the energy is coming and flowing in and out, and you're almost like you can't stop it. Like you're powerless in that situation, that it's just constantly flowing around you, and you're a victim in that sense. And so I'm not really a big fan of that idea. Whereas when I learned about overfunctioning, I was like, wow, just turning a spotlight on that and understanding my actions in that situation. I think it gave me more agency, that I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, if I'm an empath and there's all these energy vampires running around, then I have to constantly avoid this person and avoid that situation and avoid everybody, really, because they're all going to have feelings. And I didn't like that thought. I really want to know, when I'm in any given situation, what can I do to feel stronger, more secure, better, that sort of thing. And I think that's where Carl Jung was going with his emotional sovereignty idea, that, you don't have to be a victim if you're empathic, that you can move towards doing things that are going to help you feel stronger and not so much like a victim. But I think for myself, when I started to understand this concept of overfunctioning, I started to understand that this makes a lot of sense, why I feel so drained around certain people, why I feel so drained in certain situations. And when I came out of my last job, and of course I did the conflict series, if you want to go in and listen to that, that's where all that information came from, because I was constantly in situations where difficult conversations were needed, and I was constantly dealing with different conflict types. And so I really learned how to navigate that world. But nevertheless, even though intellectually I could understand the dynamics and what was going on and what I needed to do, emotionally, it's like I couldn't catch up with all of that. And it still really impacted me. It still really drained me. And I remember reaching out to people, and people would say to me all the time, oh, you did so well in that situation. You were a natural. You handled that so good. And of course, for an overachiever, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you give me that reward loop that you're constantly seeking as an overachiever. But it didn't help me emotionally, because I would go home and I would feel so drained. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? How do I make sure when I'm in that situation that I don't feel drained? And I would ask that question to people. And the answers I got were, oh, well, if you smudged and I tried that, it didn't really help me. Or I imagine that I'm putting a box around myself, like a boundary, and I'm protecting my energy. And in the moment, that didn't help me either. And so I was frustrated because I kept feeling like there was something missing, that I didn't know what to do in that situation. If that were to happen to me again, how do I handle that? And I don't want to go around avoiding people and saying, oh my gosh, this person drains me. Well, for me, it's like, why? Why does that person drain me? And what is it about that interaction that's happening that I need to understand my end of it? What am I doing to contribute to this energy loss or drain or whatever it is? And so when I started to learn about overfunctioning, I was like, holy shit, that's what it is. That's what I'm doing. I totally understand that there are things that I'm doing in a situation that exacerbates or makes it worse. And that's why I got really excited. And I said, okay, after I finish kind of integrating and processing some of this, I really have to do a podcast about it, because that's the whole point of this podcast for me, for people to have tips and tools and resources on their wellness journey, so that, again, we can all give back to our communities, and we can do it in a good and amazing way where we're operating from a full cup. And so this is part of that. So anyway, I guess for myself, I started to understand that, in those situations, in those high stress situations, I was volunteering my nervous system to people. So that's what happens. If you learn about, especially if you're doing any kind of trauma work, trauma-informed practices, you hear about this co-regulation. And so what would often happen for myself is that, if you're an empath and you identify with that, you'll understand that you're feeling the other person's energy, but then of course they're feeling your energy. And if you come from a stable and a secure place and you're very much in control of yourself, then co-regulation can be a beautiful thing, especially working with kids or teenagers who haven't quite developed that sense of security. And that's kind of what you're offering in co-regulation. But I did this with everybody all of the time. And that's kind of where I left the doorway open and allowed that person's whatever they were feeling to pour into me and destabilize me. And, and I would go home and I would feel drained and exhausted. And so it was learning that, it was not just the energy exchange, but it was very much the things I was saying, the things I was doing that was taking on more than I should have. And that's where, I wanted to have that chat with you, because if you're doing the same thing, maybe you're sitting there and, trying to understand, you have a good heart and you're trying to get along with, people in your family, or maybe your partner, maybe you have friends or people at work who constantly drain you, and and you want to do that work, and you don't want to judge them because they're going through something, or maybe that's their personality, and you go home and you think, gosh, how can I just keep doing this cycle over and over again? It's so draining. And then the natural reaction is that you start to think, okay, I need to leave this person. I need to leave this job. I need to end this relationship or friendship or whatever it is, because every time I'm around this person, I'm so exhausted, and I just can't do that to myself. Like, I'm not excited to see that person. Well, maybe you're an overfunctioner too. So maybe now you're going to learn, you're going to, take out your notebook and start writing down some notes and do some research on the internet tonight. Maybe. Well, I hope you see a new light after today, and we'll do as much as we can in this episode, but it might be a lot for you actually, because it was for me. Like I said, the first time I learned about this, I broke down in tears because so much of my life made sense. You know, so many relationships that I had, friendships, family relationships, work, boyfriends or husbands, a lot of it really started to make sense. And I started to understand what I was doing repeatedly over and over and over again. Sometimes in slightly different variations depending on the person, but very often the same thing over and over again. And well, I'm trying to unlearn that bullshit now. I don't want to live that way anymore. And if anything, you know, connects with you today, and you when you're listening to this, then there's hope. We don't have to do it anymore. Claim your energy back. So I guess I'll start with I'm a yogi, right? Everybody knows that. So I'm going to start with the Hindu Trinity, and I think I've talked about this in maybe one or two other episodes, but I'll do it again tonight. So the reason I'm going to start with the Hindu Trinity, and this is, the gods of creation and maintenance and destruction. It's like the powers of the universe in creation and cycles. And so in the Hindu Trinity, you know, the god of creation is Brahman. And so he has all of the energy to create things. But then the second god is Vishnu, and Vishnu is the god of maintenance, of preservation, and he maintains everything. He's like the peacekeeper. And then the third god is Shiva, and Shiva is the god of destruction. And so, you know, he breaks things up, tears things apart, which breaks everything down into tiny pieces so that Brahman can take over that cycle again, because Brahman needs everything to be broken down and apart to be material so that he can work with it. So when I first learned about these gods, of course, when you're a yogi, when you're doing your yoga training, you'll learn about mantras, and they often tell you, who is this god that resonates with you the most. And for me, I always chose Vishnu, right? And it made a lot of sense later because, the god Vishnu is the preserver, and he keeps the peace. He keeps everything smooth and organized and moving. But I was going through a particular phase in my life, and it was a phase where I needed destruction. I needed an ending, and I couldn't bring myself to allow that ending to happen, and I was really struggling. And I had a friend of mine, and she's Indian and she's Hindu, so she knows the gods very well. And so we had been talking, of course, about my situation, and I had a partner who had cheated on me, and I really struggled with that, and I was clinging to this relationship, and it was not good for me. I had to let it go, but I really struggled with endings. And so I had told her, and I'd been going through this struggle for a while, and she said, you really remind me of Shiva. And I was so floored when she said this, and I was like, what? This is not who I align with at all. This doesn't make any sense. And she said, no, really, you're so fierce, and you're so courageous, and you don't give a shit what anybody thinks, and you're just this well of power. And that's not how I felt. That's not how I saw myself. And so when she said it, it really threw me. And I had to really sit with that and think about that for a while. And then later I started to understand that I was so stuck in that Vishnu phase often in my life that I didn't allow natural cycles to complete themselves. I needed to allow something to fall apart. I needed to allow something to break. And my whole life, I didn't do that. I was constantly making sure everything was okay all the time, everywhere, all the time. And then when I just decided I was going to lean into the power of Shiva in that instance. And I said, okay, you know what? I need to allow an ending to happen. I need to let this break happen. And subsequently, actually, it's a little bit interesting, but I also learned how to let go, because I was somebody who clung to my grief too, because grieving really hit me hard. And I think part of that was because I was so stuck in that Vishnu energy of trying to keep the peace, keep everything organized, and that doesn't allow cycles to complete, and life cycles to complete. I was clinging to these memories of people and not letting go. And so when I really embraced that Shiva energy, it really helped me to let go of so much and just allow natural courses of action to happen. And I got to tell you, it's freeing to let go sometimes. And I really struggled with that. So I wanted to bring that up because I will bring it up probably again later, but I wanted you to understand, because when you're an overfunctioner, you're probably leaning into Vishnu's energy too much too, and the struggle is real. It's hard work to be constantly maintaining and trying to keep everything organized. And so maybe you need to learn how to lean into the power of Shiva also and allow endings to happen, allow shit to fall apart, allow other energies to enter a space where we are constantly dominating that space. When you are controlling everything, you're not allowing other energies to enter the space, right? And that's what we need to learn how to do. So when I was really examining my overfunctioning situation, I started to really sit with the things that I do. What do I do repeatedly over and over again in situations that leads to me feeling exhausted and burnt out and frustrated with whatever relationship this is? You have to get real honest with yourself. It's not fun. It's not fun to sit in your shit and unpack it and recognize the things that you're doing in a situation. But the power that comes when you do it is amazing, because then you can unlearn these crazy habits and patterns that you've been living with your whole life. And now is the time where you can start turning it around, turning that energy around, and feeling a sense of maybe relief, maybe fear also, because we cling to ideas, we cling to patterns and, familiarity. Even if it's chaotic, if it's familiar, then we'll stay stuck in that cycle sometimes voluntarily, really, because the unknown can be so frightening to us. But don't be afraid, right? Also, beauty and joy can be on the other side of that. Instead of thinking of all the negatives, let's think about the things that could come as blessings by allowing things to be different. So for myself, these are my tells. These are the things that I know I do that contribute to my overfunctioning behaviors. So the first thing that I do is that when somebody comes to me with their drama, with whatever's going on in their life, stress, some kind of problem, it's going to be dramatic. The first thing I do is I start to organize their life in my head. Like I'm a classic Ms. fix it. And so, they're telling me all their problems and I go into problem solver mode. So I mentally start mapping out their next steps and what they should say or do or text or decide. What is the course of action that they need to follow according to me, right? And sometimes I'll even replay advice in my head. So any kind of conversations we've had later, I'll replay it to refine my advice. And so then what happens in that moment, when I'm doing all that, when I go into Ms. Fix-It role, is that I have crossed the line from listening to responsibility. I have now taken on their bullshit and decided this is what needs to happen to get out of this mess, which moves me to step number 2. Number 2, now we take action, right? So now I relay the process in my head, whatever it is, that is the problem according to them or even to me. Sometimes I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but sometimes I will just observe somebody and go into Ms. Fix-It mode and give unwarranted, unsolicited advice like, holy shit, shut up, Jess. It's amazing I have any friends. Because really, how awful, right? But that's really embarrassing. That's what I've done in the past. So, number 2, I talk more than I listen. So then that means I'm giving long explanations, diagnoses, layered advice. And you know what? Even if they stop talking, because sometimes they're giving me feedback and they're agreeing and they're understanding or saying they understand what's going on, I'll just keep going. I'll keep going until even after they stop responding, right? So then that means now not only have I stopped listening and I've taken on responsibility, but now I'm starting to carry the emotional labor alone, right? So now this is where we're starting to get to that burnout stage, which is number 3, right? So I start to feel drained and resentful after all this happens, because now I'm going to have an emotional hangover. I'm going to start asking myself, why am I always the one who da 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 da? And then I start having fantasies about pulling away from people or disappearing. And then, that's kind of the final stage where I realize I have stayed too long at the party. I am past my capacity because I have completely taken on that responsibility, that emotional labor, and exhausted myself. Nobody asked for any of this, but this is what I did. And I know this is probably very similar to, some of what Mel Robbins talks about with her let them theory. But for me, it is 100% the over-functioning. And it's not that I try to control every situation and everything, but when emotions enter the picture, especially uncomfortable emotions, I know I have jumped into over-functioning role. And that's the part that I'm starting to renegotiate, right? And then why would you keep doing this, right? And I had to ask myself that. Why would I keep doing this over and over and over again in every single relationship? And I know that it started at a very pivotal moment in my life. And I was very young. And there was some, I don't want to say trauma, but a very significant event that happened. And in that moment is where I subconsciously learned that I didn't like people who were struggling. I didn't like to see people in pain. I didn't like to see them struggling. And as soon as I saw any signs of anybody struggling with their emotions for any reason, I jumped into Ms. Fix-It role. And I continue to do this for the rest of my life. And now I'm like, almost 47, a few weeks away from being 47. And I'm going to say I have been Ms. Fix-It for, since I was probably about 13. So how many years is that? That's ridiculous. I'm done. I am done this year. I'm not doing it anymore. But anyways, oh my gosh. Nevertheless, here is the hook, right? This is the thing that kept me in that cycle. It was the reward loop, probably, where people would, after I would jump into Miss Fix-It role, obviously I care, right? And people felt that care. And maybe some people appreciated it because then they didn't have to feel things, because then I've become an enabler, really, right? I'm enabling people to avoid their problems or issues, or jump past their uncomfortable feelings, which they need. People need those feelings for growth, and I was making sure everybody was not feeling them. But then if people came to me later and said, oh, Jess, you're so smart, you have it all figured out, you give the best advice, you're so wise. And as soon as I started to hear those words, that's like affirming that people are listening and you're on the right track. And then it just continued. I'm sorry, 34 years of it. If you were on the receiving end of that, sorry, I didn't know till this year. I'm undoing it, okay? So I found this really good article, Psychology Today, and so if you've been wondering, some of the signs for yourself, you're like, okay, I can hear what Jess is saying, and maybe you identify with some of it, maybe not. Maybe you're wondering, is there other tells? Yeah, there's other ones, and so we're going to go through a list of them, and you can decide for yourself. Is this you? Do you recognize any of this? So here's some other tells. Number 1, you assume that if you take a break, everything at home will fall apart. Does that hit home for you? Do you recognize that feeling? Do you carry the mental load at home and or the emotional load? If you're a mom, you probably recognize this immediately as soon as I said it, right? You're probably like, oh my God, maybe I'm an overfunctioner too. Oh, it is tricky though, because if you're a mom, we do have to raise these kids, and they're feral beasts. I know, I've had like 3 of them. And we have to try and help shape them and guide them. And so, yeah, that makes sense that you're taking on a lot of the responsibility. But if you're taking on more than you need to, again, that's where we start getting into that over-functioning role. So you might be starting to question, are there places where I need to let go of the emotional load? Then you're on the right track if you're starting to think that. Number 2, you frequently feel resentful. Yeah, if you're a mom or a wife, that's going to happen for sure. I get that too. But, of course, resentment always is a signal that, boundaries have been crossed and you're feeling that things are unfair. And so that's where, of course, we need people to be stepping up more. We need our kids to be stepping up more, our husbands, even at work, right? Like if you are feeling that if you take a break, everything will fall apart, or you're feeling resentful, again, this is you over functioning. This is you taking on more than you need to. And so this is where we have to start going, okay, check, check. Maybe I'm over functioning. It's not fun. I tell you, I cried. I sobbed like a baby the first time I heard about this because it's a lot. I feel for you. If that's you, I feel for you. Number 3, you feel more irritable toward your partner, or you tend to be snappy about things that seem trivial on the surface. I guess more irritable than usual, right? So if you're feeling more irritable or snappy about things that seem trivial on the surface, maybe you have increasing stress, and again, you're taking on the bulk of responsibility. Part of this can be if you are thinking of yourself as selfless. If you start to identify yourself as selfless or a people pleaser, that can be part of it, where you're doing more than necessary, right? As soon as you start feeling like things are unfair, then you're going to be irritable. You're going to be resentful. And that's always a sign that if you're silently suffering, you're probably doing more than you need to, because you're feeling like these things need to be done and nobody's doing them, so I'm going to do them. And frustrated that you're doing it all alone. Well, you don't have to, right? Shiva. Remember Shiva. We're going to start thinking of Shiva, and we're going to let shit fall apart. Just kidding. We're going to encourage people gently to pick shit up, but you know what? Sometimes maybe they need to learn the hard way. Number 4, you tend to anticipate and focus primarily on the needs of your partner while minimizing or suppressing your own. Ugh, this is classic Jess right here in every single relationship. I know that when I have a partner, I go into project mode. Sorry to all of my exes, all of my husbands, 2 of them, okay, not all of them, and any partners I've had. Yeah, that's me, 100%, where I make this person the sole focus of my life and obsessively restructure their life to be better. And hey, you know what? I'm not gonna lie. I've done some fine work in the past. But again, I recognize that was not my role to play. That was their job and their shit. And that's where we're learning. We're learning to recognize where we have crossed those lines if you're an overfunctioner. So let's see, number 5. Oh, maybe this one will ring out for you. Your libido has taken a nosedive. So if you're thinking about all of these things in your life, needing to do everything, feeling resentful, feeling irritable, really hyper focusing on your partner's needs, ignoring yours, yeah, it's going to make sense that you're not feeling as sexy. And resentment is probably one of the biggest killers of libido, because how can you be attracted to somebody who you look at them and you feel overwhelmed and you feel stressed out and you feel everything is unfair? Then it doesn't feel like a partner. It doesn't feel like this is your person. And so it makes a lot of sense that you are not looking at them as romantically as you would like to, right? So that's a tell. Number 6, you find it hard to be in the present moment. Ooh, that one is a big one, because when you're thinking about over functioning, it's hard to be mindful when you spend every waking thought trying to control something or someone or hold it all together single-handedly. Ugh, how can you be mindful, right? How can you be in the present moment when you're going to be obsessed about holding it all together? If it falls apart, then you're going to feel responsible. It's all your fault, and you can't let that happen. So your mind is busy all of the time trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that makes sense that you can't just relax. You can't just enjoy life, little simple pleasures. Let go. You can't let go of things. Oof. I mean, like I said, for me, that was a real tough one too, because, like I said, when I was with that cheater, he broke our relationship. And I tried to put it all back together. I did. Isn't that crazy? That's what I did. He came to me. Well, actually, he didn't come to me with his infidelity, I found out. And of course, we split for a while, but then I thought I would try to be forgiving. Didn't work. But nevertheless, I thought that if he followed my action plan and things that he needed to do for reparations, then maybe that would help with forgiveness. No, it didn't. But that was what I felt my role was, that I needed to try and put everything back together again. And I think part of that also with overfunctioning, like I said, for myself, I know it was 100% conflict avoidance, again, trying to ensure that people were not feeling messy, uncomfortable emotions. But part of that is idealism, right? Like having this picture perfect, happy life and what you must do to maintain that image, because that's all it is an image. Well, that was me. Didn't work. We broke up. Number 7, let's see. You put yourself on the back burner. Ooh. And that one's going to go very close to number 4, where you are suppressing your own needs, right? But I think right here, this is classic Jess, 100%, that when I'm not in a relationship with a person, the amount of success that I have in my life, it's crazy, because I don't have a project, right? I don't have somebody to be working on. Oh my God, that just sounds so crazy, but it's so true. And so then when I don't have I'm like, I don't know, I'm obsessed with like working and like constantly improving all of the time, everything. And so then when I don't have a partner, all of that energy goes towards my own life. And I am a worker bee to the T, and I will create 13 projects for myself and go at them with crazy vigor. I don't know. People call this ambition. I call it craziness. Because I have this obsessive energy, that I channel towards something that I must achieve. And again, it's that overachiever bullshit, right? But nevertheless, in a relationship, wow, I put that focus on a person. If he can put up with me, he's going to be a superstar. And then, when I drive him mad and we eventually break up, then, well, there's nobody to overfunction on. And so then I have to focus on my damn self. And then all these amazing goals happen. Hence my success and all the amazing things that, people think I do because I'm so ambitious. No, I'm just don't have anybody to overfunction on. All right, so how do we fix this? So, first of all, if you are like me, you're probably super organized. You're probably an overachiever. People are probably drawn to you and your amazing healing energy. And you know what? Those are really great traits. But now, let's take care of you and protect your beautiful energy. I don't want you to overfunction anymore. If you've been doing this, you know what? Maybe you learned before me. I would love to learn from you if you have. But if you haven't, then, well, you know what? I'm on this journey too. here we are. But I recognize for myself that it was when I was in my last principal job where this became fully highlighted to me that this was a challenge in my life and I didn't understand how to navigate this because, there was so much trauma, there was so much crisis, and my overfunctioning fit into that situation so much, so often. I was in this constant cycle of trauma, crisis, just overfunction, just burnout, trauma, crisis, and again, overfunctioning, burning out. And it was just on repeat for 2 whole years. And so then I had to take a step back. And of course, we were practicing trauma-informed practices, so that really helped with a lot of the conflict. But then I really learned about conflict. And now this is the final missing piece of my puzzle, the question that haunted me for 2 solid years. And now I understand what my role was in that situation. And I took it upon myself, right? And of course, it's amazing how my life circumstances led me into the perfect job for an overfunctioner, because really a principal job is a perfect job for an overfunctioner, because now you are in extreme problem solving mode constantly, right? And now, of course, you give that person a little bit of power. Well, everybody has to listen to my advice. Sorry, everybody. so then you hear all of these problems that are coming at you, and then here's me sorting through all the problems. People may or may not follow that advice, but nevertheless, I was emotionally investing in all of that stuff. Because you tell yourself, well, I care, and that's why. And then you go home and you burn out and you say, what the hell? This is not working for me. How does anybody do this job? And, well, I don't know. I think really a lot of it, at the end of the day, the reason that we're all here together now is because, thank you, yoga. I really feel that, yoga has really helped me to tune in, right? To take that step back, to learn how to sit and to meditate on everything in my life and to understand what's working, what's not working, and, peel all the bullshit away and get to the core, get to the good stuff, the beauty of life. And so for me, a lot of it was learning, processing a lot of that stuff that happened this past few months through a podcast, of course, this beautiful, amazing podcast. I had no idea I would love it so much. And I really have. It's just been such a beautiful, creative and healing space for me, not just all the people that I hope listen and benefit from it, but for myself. It's been just a super amazing and powerful journey. And like I said, combined with meditation, and that's why I can laugh today. That's why I'm not crying on the screen. Not today anyway. So before we go, of course, I want you to think about, what do we do now? How do we prevent some of this stuff from happening? How do we work on this? How do we transform from becoming an overfunctioner to not overfunctioning? Well, it's possible, right? And that's why I do these episodes, because we can all learn how to undo the things that stress us out and the things that we're doing actively to contribute to our own misery. Let's get out of our own damn way, right? So that's what the whole hope is. So here are some things that I want you to think about going forward. If you're an overfunctioner like me, you do not need to rush in. Okay, so nothing is required from you in this moment. And you need to remember that, right? We're going to learn to allow people to feel their feelings and learn from their messes. Oh my gosh, that's so hard to do, but that's what we got to work on, right? And you need to remember that other adults are allowed to struggle. They're allowed to feel discomfort and learn. So again, we need to get out of that Vishnu energy and we need to allow that Shiva energy to happen, because sometimes that's what's going to help that person to grow and to learn, is if you step aside and you allow it to happen, even if it's messy, even if you don't want them to feel those feelings. Yeah, sometimes that's the best teacher for them. And you need to understand that caring does not mean fixing. Oh, that one is like, I wish somebody had said that to me a long time ago, that you can care for somebody and not fix their problems. And that's the definition of holding space, right? That is allowing somebody to feel what they're feeling and not getting in the way of that process. You're just supporting. You're just on the side, supporting them through that process. And even in that moment, I'm going to stop right there because, again, I'm going to talk about yoga. And this is something about yoga when we think about karma. And it's very different from, a lot of the Western views of karma, like a boomerang, like a reward and punishment system. It's not. Karma is like an information system. But in this instance, karma, if we are actively doing things to try and prevent people from discomfort, then we're actually interfering with their karma. And if we interfere with somebody's karma, we actually end up taking on some of that karma. And it gets really messy. So if we learn how to allow people to grow and learn, it's better for them on their karma level, and same for us, right? So it's learning those boundaries of allowing people to go through what they need to go through and not jumping to savior mode, right? So, this is a big one for Jess. This one is written for me. Advice is optional and silence is allowed. So this is where, I can think of all the amazing Dear Abby advice that I gave out that I didn't need to. And let that be known to all the people out there who love my advice. No, you're not going to get it anymore. I am learning to not do that. I'm learning to enjoy the silence, right? That one is tough. Sometimes silence is golden. Jess is practicing silence after this podcast is over. Also, you can be present without being responsible, right? And that's where, that was a big lesson for me. Not jumping in to save everybody. Another thought, their emotions are not your emergencies. So, that one hits me hard. That if somebody's in crisis, I don't need to make it my crisis, right? But that's what I often did. Stepping back is an act of respect for them and for you, right? So when we step back, that means now we're giving them that trust and that faith that they're going to be able to save themselves. They're going to stand on their own 2 feet. And if we jump out of the way because we have a savior complex, we're not allowing them to grow and develop strength. And really, it's a little bit insulting on our part because it's like we're basically saying we don't think that they can do it without us, which is really bullshit, right? Of course they can do it. So we need to learn how to step back so that they can develop that strength. And sometimes, it might be wobbly at first. That's how strength grows. We have to let them, right? And so they'll respect themselves more and maybe they'll respect us a little bit more if we're not interfering with that process. Here's another one. Ooh, this one might hit you like me. You are worthy of connection even when you are not helpful. So if you derive a lot of value from feeling that you need to save everybody and recognition and validation of that, then this one will be maybe a game changer for you. Understand and recognize that you don't have to be helpful. You know, that you are worthy of love and connection even when you are not helpful. I hope that one sits with you, because for me, I felt like I needed to always be doing something, always be saving somebody in order to have value, which is really sad. But, well, now we're unlearning that. And, here's another one. Because you are probably, if you're at all like me, you are used to lopsided relationships. So think of this. Mutual relationships feel steady, not draining, right? Two people pouring into the relationship, two people helping, two people doing the work. It doesn't have to be just one person doing everything like a one-man band with a partner who just kind of shows up. Well, that's not a relationship, right? So remember that. Mutual relationships, they feel even and steady, not draining. And lastly, you can choose peace over proving your value or worthiness. Well, we kind of talked about that one a little bit already, but yeah, you don't have to be constantly proving yourself. That if you're feeling that way, and this is what I did when I first learned about this, and I went into, emotional shock as I sat there thinking about every single relationship in my life. I had to step back for a little bit. I had to step back from a lot of relationships, and, people maybe didn't know why, and maybe they were a little bit hurt from it. But I was recalibrating. I was, processing, integrating, and learning what my role was, and understanding that in this moment, while I am processing and figuring all this shit out, I'm just not going to engage in relationships until I can understand what it is that I do to contribute to my own freaking drama, right? And so how do I untangle myself from that nasty web that I made? So I chose peace for a while, right? And instead of proving my value and my worthiness, and you can do that. You can do that for yourself constantly, all the time. But now, I'm back in many relationships, renegotiated, right? I'm in those relationships in a different space, in a different mental space, in a different emotional space. And that's where, it's working on that emotional sovereignty, that we talked about a little bit earlier. And it's really understanding and recognizing when I see those moments approaching, when I'm about to jump into my old Jess role, and I stop myself, and I have a little checklist of reminders. And you know what the beautiful thing is? Now, when I've had similar situations that would have rocked me, that would have drained me, unraveled me, I'd go home and I'd be stressed out. And, if you have unhealthy coping mechanisms, maybe you would drink or start smoking or, whatever it is you do when you're stressed. Now, the same way. Because now I recognize, there's a Jess trap. We're not going down that trap. we're going to do things differently. We're going to respond a little bit differently in this situation. And by doing that, I've walked away from similar situations and I've gone home and I've felt light and joyful. And I've been like, hallelujah, that is exactly what I needed in my life in all of those situations where I was like, clambering, trying to figure out what the hell is happening in this hurricane of emotions, this whirling storm that is like sucking me in whenever there's crisis and drama. And now I get it. Now I just say, ooh, not my monkey, not my circus. I'm going to let you sit in your poo-poo. I'm just kidding. I don't revel in it, but I'm learning to understand and take a step back. So, if this episode hit you hard and, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but if it does, maybe at some point we can also do some role plays or some scripted responses that might help you if you're an overfunctioner like me. But I think for today, like this probably might be enough, right? And like I said, I had a really strong response, and so many moments, so many relationships really came flooding out for me to examine. And so I recognize that could be you. Maybe that after this episode is over, you're going to go and do some thinking and some soul searching, and that might be enough for you today. So I don't want to overwhelm you. I recognize that it's already been an hour. I think this is the longest solo episode I ever did. But of course, for me, like I said, it was a very powerful and enlightening moment. And I'm so grateful that even though I'm almost 47, I'm grateful I learned it now. That means I don't have to spend another year like this. I don't have to spend another month like this. I can really do that work to untangle myself and find more joy in my relationships, really. Just allowing people to stand on their own 2 feet and stop jumping to rescue everybody. I feel so good even after doing this episode. So that's how I know it was such a revelation to me. And I hope it is for you too. Or maybe somebody who might be going through something similar. Maybe they desperately need to find a way out. And they're tired of being drained and exhausted by this relationship or that relationship. And if that's the case, share this episode with them. Maybe it'll help, right? It helped me. So with that, thank you so much for listening. I really enjoyed sharing this journey with you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.